It's a public hearing. It deals with the proposed Stockbridge redevelopment plan for tax allocation district number 1, downtown and North Henry Boulevard corridor, presented by Mr. Gardner and Gary Monaghan, if that's how you pronounce it. Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna let Gary take over and get into his presentation as to the update as to where we are with the redevelopment plan. Gary?
Well, good evening again, Mayor and Council. I don't know if members of the public are here. I can leave it to your discretion if you want me to go through this presentation again. Basically, I was here 3 weeks ago and gave you a summary of what was in the redevelopment plan. Since that time, we finished the report, delivered it to the city a couple weeks ago. Hopefully, you have seen it in your packet. And so basically, I have the same presentation that I delivered before. Before it was for the council's information. Today it's for the public's information. I can go through it again if you want. If you don't, that's up to you, Mayor.
Council, what kind of questions do you have? Any initial questions at all? All right. How about this, sir? This is being recorded.
Okay.
So let's go through it, process.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Let's see. Just give me. So basically, as I said, the way the redevelopment powers law works is you have one opportunity a year to create a tax allocation district if that's what the city council wants to do as a matter of public policy. So you have until December 31st to adopt this plan. And if you fail to do that or choose not to do that, it delays the process for a year. So we basically have been working on this for the past few months, working with the city manager's office, and basically have gotten this plan to the point where you could adopt it at your next meeting. Basically, the way the law works is in order to use tax increment financing in Georgia, you have to create a tax allocation district. And in order to create a tax allocation district, you must have a plan. And the local governing body, yourselves, has to pass a resolution adopting the plan and stating that but for this plan, redevelopment would not occur. And that resolution would be drafted for your consideration at your next meeting. In order for a TAD to be created, it must exist in a qualified area. So part of the process of this redevelopment plan is to justify the creation of the district to show that the area you've selected to do this qualifies under the statute. And this slide takes some language directly from the statute that defines what a redevelopment area is, which again would enable you to create a TAD within this area. And these criteria are, these are just some of the criteria, which include pervasive poverty, high unemployment, high commercial or residential vacancies, stagnant or declining rents or sales prices for real estate, and I think what is most characteristic of this part of Stockbridge is the presence of older buildings that really don't have historical significance. There's certainly some in the area that certainly do, but a number, particularly residential properties, are not historically significant and are relatively low value. And the area that we're targeting has certainly grown slower than the city as a whole in terms of its property tax digest. We identified within the proposed TAD almost 500,000 square feet of buildings that are more than 40 years old. And if you just look at commercial property values along North Henry Boulevard, I did a pretty extensive analysis of parcel by parcel data. And up until the recent commercial reval, there's an argument that commercial property values have been declining, not increasing in this part of the city. So the long and short of it is that it definitely qualifies as a redevelopment area. And this map shows the part of the city that we analyzed and looked at and suggest that you designate as a redevelopment area. And the tax allocation district would actually cover a portion of this area, not all of it. The area has a population of about 7,700. It's 26% of the city's population today. You'll be adding another 7,700 people next year with annexation. So it's about, population-wise, about the same size as the area that is about to be annexed into the city. Population and household growth in this part of the city has been about 1% lower than the city average. The main difference between this and the rest of Stockbridge is the home ownership rate. About half the households in this part of the city are renters, and that's not just because of apartment complexes in the area. It's also because a significant number of your single-family homes in this part of the city are owned by investors and rented rather than being owner-occupied. Median owner-occupied housing value is 30% lower than the city, and 30% lower than the city, and 37% lower than the county average, as is the median household income in this area. So again, it qualifies under the statute as being a redevelopment area. So within it, you can create a tax allocation district, and a TAD is simply a list of tax parcels. They have to be contiguous, they have to be connected, and it's just the area of the city where you would be allowed to use tax increment financing and provide incentives. And for the benefit of the public, oftentimes when the public gets confused about these districts, it's because they believe certain things that TADs do not do. And the main thing is that being part of a TAD does not oppose a tax increase on your property compared to anybody else in the city. It doesn't grant you property tax abatements. It doesn't entitle developers or property owners to receive abatements. They can apply for them, but they're not entitled to them. This has nothing to do with eminent domain or urban renewal. That's a different part of state law. You have parts of the city where that power has been used in the past, but it's not related to this part of the redevelopment powers law. It does not authorize you to spend money, to issue bonds. Those decisions will come later. They would be considered by the city council at a later date. And it does not bind the county or school district. By your adopting this plan, does not bind them to participate. They have to make those decisions later, hopefully in the early part of next year. And again, it doesn't entitle any property owner or developer to receive TAD funds for any purpose. It just gives them the opportunity to make proposals to the city and request your participation and support. So the tax allocation district that we've proposed consists of 345 parcels, a little over 500 acres. The tax digest associated with those 500 acres shown on this map is about $35.9 million. That's an estimate. That would have to be confirmed by the county assessor after the plan is adopted, but I think it's pretty close. That represents a little less than 3.4% of the city's tax base today. With your annexation next year, it's probably 2% of your tax base would be inside this TAD. It would be a pretty insignificant amount. There is almost 1.25 million square feet of existing buildings in the TAD, including public property like City Hall, religious institutions, et cetera. That's all buildings and structures. The average age is 1970. So that's 42 years. That's the average building age. I found about 650,000 square feet of commercial buildings, taxable commercial buildings, excluding churches, public buildings, et cetera. The average age of those commercial buildings is 1972, and most of those buildings are along the North Henry Boulevard corridor at the bottom of the TAD, plus the few buildings that are in a little bit north of here inside the downtown area. The average tax value of those buildings is less than $75 per square foot. So to build a new Retail space today, some of the new construction going on in the city, that costs, taxable value of that space when it's finished is going to be $125 to $150 a square foot, some even higher. So that just gives you context of how low valued commercial property is in this part of Stockbridge. And then we found 323 housing units, about 200 of them were multifamily units, and 134 single-family homes, of which about 40% were investor-owned rentals. And the average value of those homes was less than $150,000, and the average age was 1966. So if this TAD is created as of December 31st, what would happen is that the digest would be fixed at that period of time. From that period forward until the TAD is dissolved, the city general fund would continue to collect revenues based on that $35.9 million of digest that exists today. So you would continue to get city revenues based on that value, as would the county and school district. If they choose to participate, then any increase in tax revenues from within the TAD caused by the growth in value of property based on projects you would implement, like the downtown plan, based on future development of underdeveloped parcels today, that revenue would all come to the city under your control in a special fund. Most of that revenue would be county and school district taxes that the city would be able to use for redevelopment purposes. Since your millage rate is non-existent today and would be low in the future, is really no downside to city taxpayers for you to be able to use that revenue inside the TAD for redevelopment purposes. And then I would also point out that only real estate taxes are pledged. So any increased revenue you get from within the TAD from local option sales taxes, from new retail, from personal property taxes, from business licenses, all of that revenue would be new to the city and continue to go to the general fund, even though those properties are in the TAD. In terms of what is the development potential of this area, I was actually quite surprised at what I think is the potential here. In addition to the downtown area that you've been planning for literally decades now, there's a lot of underdeveloped and undeveloped land east and west of this building. And those large parcels, areas where the most potential exists, are shown on this map. There are 5 of them, and I'll go through them. The main one, the one thing that has to happen, I think, before anything else significantly changes in Stockbridge, is you need to implement your downtown plan. You've been implementing the public source, portions of that plan since the early 2000s. You've invested in a new city hall, amphitheater, you have more public investments on the way, you've built parks, et cetera, et cetera. But so far, the private investment has not followed. And that's the goal of this TAD, is to create tax increment financing to enable you to attract private development to your downtown. And again, the city retained TSW to update the earlier plans that have been done. You had the 2005 urban redevelopment plan. You had a study that was called the RSVP plan back in 2018. Basically, what TSW did was consolidated those 2 plans and tried to come up with a realistic estimate of how much physical development potential exists in the downtown area. Now, the city controls and owns a number of these sites and has the ability to influence future development. You obviously don't own all of them, and there's no guarantee that the private sector would participate, but I think you're in a good position to implement, if not this particular plan, something that looks like it. And as shown here, if there's 27 acres shown inside this area, currently today it has a taxable market value of less than $6 million because most of the property is tax exempt today. With redevelopment, it could easily support close to $90 million in value. We're talking 220 potential housing units, rehabilitation of existing commercial space, plus new commercial buildings and freestanding and mixed-use buildings. So that would be an enormous benefit to the city and, again, would create the kind of dining and entertainment district but you've had at least 3 plans that I've read that talk about that kind of thing. In addition to that, we found there are 2 areas just east and west of downtown that are largely undeveloped. And at modest densities and value, those 2 areas together could add $177 million in total value and $70 million in tax digest to the city over time. And I don't think this would happen overnight. I think this would happen after your downtown plan is well underway. But again, it would not take a lot of development. We're talking, only 450 units, which sounds like a lot, but it's on 120 acres. And there are several locations within Stockbridge where you've had that kind of density developed on greenfield sites. So those 2 areas would create a lot of increment to the TAD, probably would not require a lot of city investment that you have not already programmed. And then in addition, further to the west on North Henry Boulevard, there are 3 other areas that are significantly underdeveloped and could support new development and digest growth over time. And again, estimated, that's almost 80 acres associated with these 3 parcels. They're partially developed today, but again, could easily support $90 million in future value, assuming maybe one of the sites goes as a multifamily site, one of the sites is a townhome development. That was before you at your last meeting. These numbers seem to be pretty achievable. So when you add it all up, and again, recognizing this is a long-term forecast, this is 20 to 25 years, the value of the district could increase. This could be a part of the city that could easily support $350 million worth of new development, again, over a couple of decades. Going from 600,000 square feet to over 2 million square feet, again, on 500 acres, that's not a lot of density. And the taxable full market value at build-out could be over $400 million, where it's less than $100 million today. That creates a digest of, at build-out, excuse me, let me find this number. There's a lot of numbers on this table. A gross digest of about $165 million, compared again to $35 million today. So to me, this opportunity, even if you don't believe that it's that big, even if it's 50% of this opportunity, it certainly merits creating the mechanism that would help you to achieve it. And it certainly merits spending significant effort as a city to try to make this happen and try to implement the plans that again, I've read plans going back to 2002 where you've had this vision that you've been trying to implement. This mechanism would help you get there. What this graph here just shows what that build-out could mean in terms of future tax revenues overall and future increment to the TAD special fund. This assumes that the city will enact the millage rate basically to replace the county police district with a city tax to fund your own police department. This assumes you would pledge that millage within the TAD to the TAD, and it assumes that the county and school district would participate at 100%, which is, to be determined whether they agree to do that. If they agree to do that, you can see that over 30 years, there's a total non-discounted dollars. Over 30 years, $110 million in revenue could be generated within this TAD if the redevelopment occurs. What I've done in the second row is discount that to present value using a 6% discount rate, which would approximate what that revenue would represent if it existed today, which would be about $30 to $37 million, the equivalent today. Again, achieved over a long period of time. The first 15 years would be substantially smaller than that. But again, if you're successful, that's what it could mean to the district. And it gives you a significant cushion to negotiate with the county and school district if they don't want to participate at 100%. What I did here is take reasonable if the maximum is 30 to 37 million, just take 30 million as an initial estimate of what you could leverage over time in current, $22, and what those uses could be, how those funds could be used. And clearly the most important thing is to get private investment in your downtown plan, so the bulk of the funds are for direct incentives for what I call catalyst projects, most of which would be in the downtown area. We've provided some additional funds that could be used as incentives to get owners of multifamily developments to invest in rehabilitating and increasing the value of apartments in and around downtown. There's a set aside for structured parking in case there's a need to build structured parking to support downtown. There's additional funds for public parks and amenities, basically small, much smaller than the investments you've already made in those types, and additional road and infrastructure improvements. Again, the infrastructure underneath the downtown plan, will need significant investment. So that's a blueprint of how that 30 million could be used over time. Again, would not be available day one. I'm not suggesting that in 2023 or early 2024 you issue a $30 million TAD bond, but over time, through a number of individual agreements or deals, you could leverage this much money. The draft report that was delivered is about 80 pages long. In addition to what I've talked about in detail, it has it designates the city council as a redevelopment agency, which means that you can delegate functions to your DDA, to your urban redevelopment agency, but ultimately you retain as city council authority to make any decisions needed with respect to future bond issues, future development agreements with private parties. You're the ultimate arbiter of what those would be, unless you choose to designate, those responsibilities to other parties. There's a long section that talks about consistency of this plan with your zoning ordinance, your future land use map, talks a lot about the LCI study. There's a requirement in the law that you have to confirm the city's commitment to follow state historic preservation policies. You have historic preservation commission, so that is not going to be a problem. So there's a statement in there to that effect. It suggests that the potential life of this TAD could be as long as 30 years. It could go as long as 50 years by state law. The probability is it will probably be dissolved in less than 30 years if you accomplish your objectives. You can dissolve the TAD at any time, as long as there are no outstanding debt obligations. I've tried to give the city the maximum flexibility to use whatever approach you want to use to finance redevelopment, including but not limited to issuing bonds. You don't have to issue bonds if you don't want to. It just gives you that authority if you decide to, and as I mentioned, only real estate taxes are pledged to the TAD. We are not suggesting that you pledge personal property taxes or any portion of the local option sales tax, although you do have the authority to do that if you want it. The last section of the report includes a school system impact analysis on the county school system. Talks about basically the existing, how many school kids come out of the city of Stockbridge today, what that represents per household, has a forecast of how many students are anticipated from within the TAD if redevelopment is achieved. It's a long-term, modest increase to school enrollment. Hopefully it will give you some ammunition and give the school district some guidance when you start talking about whether they would consent and under what circumstances. Again, this is where we are in the process, the public hearing today. Barring any significant changes to the plan, which you can ask for, it would be presented to you in a couple of weeks to adopt on the 12th. Your legal counsel will prepare a TAD resolution that you would act on at that time. You can schedule a second hearing immediately prior to that vote. And, If you choose to adopt the plan, then the next thing to take place is that we would submit the list of TAD parcels, which are in the back of the report, to the county tax assessor to verify. When the county assessor finishes that request is then sent to the Georgia Department of Revenue. And if all goes well, by end of January or February of next year, you would get a letter from the Commissioner of Revenue certifying the existence of the TAD. And from that point forward, the county assessor is obligated to prepare a digest of the TAD every year until, for as long as it's in existence. And then the last step of the process is the county and school district really cannot do anything until you pass the resolution and the TAD is created. As soon as that happens, then I assume that the next step would be to go to the county commission first and then to the Board of Education and request consent to the TAD. And typically that happens when TADs are approved late in the year, as we are here. That would happen in the first quarter of next year. And hopefully you can get an answer and you start negotiating intergovernmental agreements, get something on paper by the end of the first quarter. I believe that's everything I have, and
All right.
probably more information than you wanted to hear.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. Council, any questions for Gary at this point?
Just one.
Go ahead, sir.
City manager, come to the podium.
Good deal. Okay, you got a follow-up question? Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Gardner, this redevelopment plan helps to aid us in being able to move forward with opportunity zones.
Yes, we're already pretty much about 2 or 3 steps in that direction with the fact that we've designated a redevelopment area. We've got the data on the area, and unless they've changed something since I've done one back in 2010, 2012, which I know they've changed some of the requirements. We just have to go through DCA and submit the required information to them to get the designation as an opportunity zone. And for those who don't know, that allows for us, this tool is kind of a pre-construction, that's kind of a post thing. So when we actually do have buildings down here, the opportunity zone would allow for us to give job tax credits for jobs that are in the opportunity zone up to $3,500 per employee that you don't have to pay to the state. That money can be reinvested back in your business to advertise or to make improvements. But that's the goal of the opportunity zone, is to make sure that those employees, you don't pay employee tax to the state. Those funds can be used to put back into your business and make your business prosperous. They recognize that obviously the first 3-4 years of any new business is the critical part of that, and this would allow for those businesses to not to have to pay those taxes to the state and invest those monies. The only caveat that's in there is those employees will have to be with that employer for up to the first year. Then they qualify for this exemption, if I remember correctly. It's not automatic.
And I just want to understand, and I want you to understand, the DCA director was here on the ground in Stockbridge, leaning forward to assist us.
Yep.
Said the area, everything was in place, and wanted to help us with this package. That opportunity zone blows this area up, post, as you said.
Yes, sir.
We just need to make sure that we're moving down those tracks.
That's the next thing
cannot
coming before you.
understand and not emphasize enough. 10 jobs, $35,000.
That is
right?
correct. That is
There will
correct.
be some employers, we got a hotel or whatever here that will create multiple jobs, and it would be entitled to that. And it would put us in that target zone where these developers would put us at the top of the list for their projects because they would qualify for this. We need to move this along.
That's the next one that'll be coming before you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the council? Okay, not, thank you, Gary. See you in a couple weeks. Appreciate it. New business. Council consideration to approve the 2023 public meeting schedule.